Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today we are digging into an incredible geological story about how Pakistan is mapping out its massive local iron resources to fuel a totally self-sufficient steel industry. For decades, the global steel trade has relied heavily on these really complex, fragile international supply chains. But as we're about to see, sometimes the absolute key to industrial independence is literally buried right beneath your feet. So why the sudden rush to dig it up? Well, picture this. Scrap iron prices have shot up a staggering 200% in recent years. It's wild. Suddenly, local rocks that were previously kind of brushed off as low-rated by international industry standards have transformed into a highly attractive investment. Economic necessity is forcing this brilliant reevaluation of what is actually possible using domestic resources.
Here is our roadmap for today. First, the iron opportunity. Second, the northern magmatic block. Third, the southern sedimentary block. Fourth, the iron coal belt. And finally, the path to production.
Let's jump right into Section 1, the iron opportunity. And spoiler alert, it's about 1.6 billion tons.
Yes, you heard that right. Pakistan has identified an absolutely massive 1,600 million tons of total iron resources across the country, containing an average of about 30% iron. That is a tremendous foundation to build on. To put that into perspective, major industrial giants like the Pakistan steel mills in Karachi have historically operated almost entirely on imported iron ore. Tapping into this massive domestic reserve is the very first critical step toward breaking away from those costly imports. Our main focus today is the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. This specific region alone holds over 200 million tons of these identified resources. But what makes this province an absolute dream for geologists is how these resources are split by some really distinct geological traits, basically dividing the area into two very different but equally fascinating blocks. Moving right along to Section 2, the northern magmatic block, where we are looking at high grades but low tonnages.
There is a really sharp contrast here between the two halves of the province. Up north, you get incredibly high-grade iron. We're talking sometimes reaching up to 65% purity. But there's a catch. It comes in very low tonnages. Down south, however, you get these massive, sprawling tonnages, but the grade drops to around 30%. It's your classic mining trade-off between quality and quantity.
But here's the other issue with the north. The terrain, in places like Besham and Patan and the Khuzestan district, is incredibly rugged. Getting heavy machinery in there is quite literally an uphill battle. It poses a serious logistical challenge for any large-scale extraction. You really have to want what's inside those mountains to go in and get it. And, well, there's a pretty good reason to want it. This northern region is defined by primary magmatic iron ore, like the magnetite found in Chitral. What's super fascinating here is that this magnetite actually acts as an indicator. Its presence usually points to a porphyry system, meaning these iron occurrences are basically geological breadcrumbs vectoring us toward precious metals like copper, lead, zinc, silver, and even gold. So the iron might just be the warm-up act for a much larger treasure.
Okay, let's head south for Section 3, the southern sedimentary block, where things get to a massive industrial scale.
This southern area covers a huge footprint, encompassing districts like Nowshera, Kahat, Hengu, and Di Khan. Because of its sprawling, layered geology, this isn't just a prime domain for steel. The sedimentary nature of the rocks here makes it an absolute powerhouse for the cement, chemical, and general manufacturing industries too.
When you look at the raw data, the sheer scale becomes obvious pretty quickly. Take the Nizampur block in the Nowshera district, for example. That block alone holds an estimated 168 million tons of iron ore at around 29% grade. That completely dwarfs other promising blocks like Pezu's 12.6 million tons. Because of this massive volume, Nizampur is heavily prioritized as a main target for huge industrial development. Geologically, it's a whole different world from the north. Unlike those deep earth magmatic rocks, the south features secondary sedimentary ores. We are talking about hydrated hematite, siderite, and limonite. These were laid down as thin sedimentary layers, meaning they settled layer by layer over millions of years alongside ancient sandstones and shales.
Which brings us to Section 4, the iron coal belt, literally a recipe for steel.
There's a highly prospective geological belt running right through here, roughly delineated by a major tectonic feature known as the Main Boundary Thrust, or MBT for short. This fault line stretches for over 200 kilometers, ripping right through the province from Hengu in the west, through Nizampur, and all the way to Lower Hazara in the east. Think of it as a 200-kilometer roadmap of buried industrial potential. So why is this specific belt such a game changer? Well, in heavy industry, bad logistics can completely tank a project. But here, nature has conveniently packed all the essential ingredients right next to each other. You've got the iron ore, the coal to fuel the furnaces, plus cement-grade limestone and dolomite to act as a flux in the smelting process, all in the same neighborhood. It is the perfect geological recipe for a localized steel industry.
Right now, the mining happening here is highly fragmented, just lots of small, separate leases. But government reports suggest an incredible business opportunity to consolidate. The strategy is to integrate these scattered concessions into massive, coordinated joint ventures. Imagine private investors forming a giant consortium, pooling all those resources to seamlessly feed a localized, high-output mini-steel unit. It's a massive play.
Finally, Section 5, Path to Production, how we actually get from rocks to steel.
How exactly does a 30% grade rock in the ground become a steel girder? It requires a few distinct steps. First, you have to upgrade the raw ore into high-concentration iron using gravity or magnetic separation. Next, those concentrates are smelted, often via a process called direct reduction to create sponge iron or in a blast furnace for pig iron. Finally, that intermediate product is smelted down once more to produce pure, workable steel.
And this isn't just a theory anymore. We are already seeing it become reality. There's been active movement recently, like a tender notice for the Nokundi iron ore project over in the neighboring province of Balochistan. They are actively putting together a bankable feasibility study to design a production facility capable of processing 1 million tons of iron ore every single year. The gears of industry are visibly turning. Ultimately, all of this mapping, testing, and tendering points toward one massive overarching goal. Take the Dilband prospect in Balochistan, which holds about 200 million tons and is chemically very similar to the Pezu sedimentary ore we discussed earlier. The grand strategy is to use these local resources as an indigenous substitute for the imported ore that currently feeds massive facilities like the Pakistan steel mills.
Which brings us to the big takeaway from this explainer. With global supply chain costs skyrocketing, and literally hundreds of millions of tons of iron, coal, and limestone sitting side by side just waiting underground, we have to ask, is this iron coal belt the undisputed key to Pakistan's industrial self-sufficiency? It certainly looks like the foundation is set in stone. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer. I hope you found this deep dive as fascinating as I did.